The sun is only a pale smear behind the eastern haze when the scribe calls the roll. He sits cross-legged on a low stool, reed pen in hand, palette balanced on his thigh, ticking off names into a ledger that will one day become just a worn ostracon in a rubbish heap. Around him, men tighten their linen kilts, adjust leather sandals, and drain the last of their morning beer. Thick, nourishing, more like liquid bread than drink. They are not slaves. They are organized into files and work gangs with proud names: the Friends of Khufu, the Drunkards of Menkor, paid in grain, beer, fish, and onions. Their families live in a planned village south of the plateau, with bakeries, breweries, and clinics. Excavations millennia later will find healed bones and evidence of medical care. These are state workers, part of a national project to raise a stairway of stone toward the sun. A foreman, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head to keep the heat off, signals to his team. They move in rhythm, a chant keeping time as they haul a sled bearing a limestone block freshly quarried from Tura, its surface gleaming pale in the morning light. Water is splashed ahead of the sled to reduce friction, a trick known to generations. A small boy scurries with a jar, careful not to spill. The path up the ramp is packed with crushed gypsum and dust. At intervals, gang stelae stand, simple carved stones where the crew has left its mark, pride etched in each hieroglyph. When they reach the resting platform, skilled masons take over, eyeing the block, checking its angles with a right-angled tool, aligning it to the cardinal points by sighting on the circumpolar stars the night before. The pyramid is less a tomb than a cosmic engine. Its shafts aimed at eternity, its sides flattening the chaos of the world into precision. Midday is a furnace. They break to eat coarse bread, dried fish, and onions that sting the eyes but fortify the body. In the shade of a tool shed, two men rehaft copper chisels. The foreman gifts them with a smear of malachite salve for blistered hands. Copper is soft, chisels dull fast, but the system is efficient. Sharpen, cut, sharpen again. A team of plasterers smooths joints. Another crew fills gaps with gypsum mortar. Above, a priest in clean linen offers incense at a small shrine. Daily piety amid daily labor. By late afternoon, the block is seated. The scribe makes another notation. The day's tally is complete. As the sun drops, the plateau glows rosy gold, and the gangs descend toward the village. Children run to meet them. A woman laughs, thrusting a jug into her husband's hands. Tomorrow will be another day of hauling, cutting, chanting, but also of community, rations, and a sense, spoken or not, that they are part of something that will outlast every breath they take. Centuries later, a Greek tourist will be told, "Slaves built the pyramids." The bones in the workers' cemetery will disagree. The Sahara was once a green quilt of seasonal lakes and grassy savannas where herders painted long-horned cattle beneath summer storms. As the monsoons withdrew and the sand advanced, families drifted toward the only artery that still pulsed with certainty. The Nile welcomed them with a rhythm older than memory. Each year its water unfurled across the valley floor, left a blanket of black silt, and slipped back within its banks like a careful guest. Villages flowered along the river's curve. First reed huts around grain pits, then mud brick clusters with courtyards and goat pens. potters learned to coax shine from clay. Bead makers drilled carnelian, and the dead were curled on their sides in shallow graves, a few seashells or a bone comb beside them, tokens for a journey no one could yet name, but everyone suspected. Centuries stacked like sediment. In Upper Egypt, the Badarian people fired bowls so thin a fingertip could light them from within. Their successors at Nakada inked red ochre boats on cream-slipped jars, high-prowed craft hung with standards, rowers bent in unison, a foretaste of processions to come. Elites began to posture in death, stone pallets in the shape of fish or turtles, copper pins, lapis beads that had crossed deserts on pack-camel caravans. Over time, 3 towns, Hierakonpolis, Nakada, and Abydos, swelled into competing centers, each ruled by chieftains whose burial chambers grew deeper, whose retainers were interred nearby to serve forever, whose ambitions tipped inevitably toward war. When the final dry season broke the will of the Delta, a southern ruler advanced downstream, wearing the tall white crown of Upper Egypt. His name, perhaps Narmer, perhaps one of several conquerors whose deeds later merged, echoed on clay seals and incised ivory tags, a hawk god trampling marsh plants, a captive king kneeling beneath a mace. Whether the unification was sudden or slow, by around 3100 BCE, the double crown had been forged. A new capital rose on a limestone ridge overlooking the floodplain. Its people called it Ineb Hedge, the White Walls. The Greeks would call it Memphis. From that pivot, the king's officials counted grain, reassigned cattle, and dispatched scribes with ebony tally sticks to every nome. Hieroglyphs multiplied from terse ownership labels into strings of nouns, verbs, and the first cautious dreams of eternity. With order came audacity. Djoser, second ruler of the Third Dynasty, commissioned his architect Imhotep to stack limestone mastabas one atop another until they formed a giant stone staircase. The step pyramid shimmered in the desert dawn, like a frozen beam of sunlight. Labor camps, planned villages with bakeries, breweries, and clinics, appeared beside quarries and along the causeways that led to royal necropolises. Stonecutters traced guidelines in red ochre, copper chisels rang, and sled teams hauled blocks on lubricated gypsum tracks. When Khufu chose the Giza Plateau, he demanded an angle so precise that the pyramid's shadow would measure seasons, a casing so smooth that sunlight would flare from its flanks like a beacon. At the western edge of that plateau, the sun is only a pale smear when the scribe calls the roll. He sits cross-legged on a low wooden stool, reed pen poised above a palette streaked with black and red ink. Around him, men tighten linen kilts, splash water on their faces, and swallow thick morning beer, liquid bread laced with dates. They are organized into files, proud crews with names like the Drunkards of Khafra or Friends of Menkor, paid in grain, fish, and salt. Their families sleep in neat rows of mud brick houses south of the plateau. Their bones, uncovered thousands of years later, will show healed fractures and traces of medical salve, proof that the state values healthy hands more than discarded ones. A foreman lifts a baton, and the chant begins, deep, steady, timed to footsteps. 40 men lean into a sled bearing a Tura limestone block whose face still glints with quarry dust. A boy hurries ahead, tipping water from a jar to slick the path. The ramp curves upward, tamped hard with gypsum and clay, lined with stake markers and gang stele, where foremen have carved falcons and cartouches to brag about weekly tallies. At the platform, masons wait with wooden plumb bobs and copper squares. They nudge, pivot, shave slivers with chisels annealed over night fires. By midday, the sun is a white furnace. The crew rests in the shade of scaffolding, chewing onions, dipping bread into a pot of lentils thick with coriander. A priest in fresh linen mutters a hymn to Ptah, god of craftsmen, and scatters cedar resin onto a brazier. The air smells of sweat, stone dust, and incense, a scent no breeze of later ages will quite replicate. When the block is seated, flush, the scribe notes the placement, sketches a quick profile, and adds a short line of praise to the reigning king. The men descend at dusk to a village glowing with cook fires. Children race between doorways. A mother binds a reed toy into her toddler's fist. Tomorrow another block, another chant, another entry in a ledger destined for a midden heap. Yet each laborer senses, even if he lacks the words, that his sweat is mortar between mortal breath, and something meant to outlast the turning of constellations. While Giza's horizon rises stone upon stone, life downstream folds into the cadence of order. Nomarchs oversee floodgates, measure the shaduf swings that lift water from canals into basin fields. Tax collectors tally sheaves on wooden boards in neat base 10 rows. Shepherds brand calves with clay ceilings impressed by scarab amulets. In Memphis, the court oracle selects lucky days for expeditions to Sinai copper mines, and royal heralds recite titles that now fill half a breath. King of Upper and Lower Egypt, living Horus, possessor of the Sed festival, great of white crown. These phrases are more than rhetoric. They are threads binding the kingdom to the concept of Mat. Cosmic balance embedded in fair weighing of grain, honest judgment in courts, and faithful recitation of dawn hymns. Yet cracks appear. As pyramids consume treasury and manpower, provincial tombs grow grander. Nomarch statues carved in cedar, eyes inlaid with rock crystal, sit in cliff chapels gazing toward fields they all but rule. Papyrus letters complain of late copper shipments, missing rations, foremen bribed to overlook absentee workers. Pepi II reigns into extreme old age. By the time he dies, trade has faltered, rains to the south have shifted, and governors have learned that the palace wall is far away and thin. Still, a generation earlier, as the last casing stones are set against Khafra's pyramid, the idea of permanence seems unquestionable. The geometry is flawless. The burial chamber is aligned to the imperishable stars. The sarcophagus waits behind a plug of granite. A young mason stands at the pyramid's halfway terrace during evening dismissal. He wipes grit from his brow and watches the sunlight bleed out of the western sky. Beneath him, the Nile is a black ribbon. Beyond it, fields lie blue in shadow, ringed by palm crowns. He tries to imagine the day someone will forget the king's name, or the layout of the ramps, or the hustle of the gang's streets, and he cannot. The blocks are too many, the work songs too loud in memory. He presses his palm to the cooling stone, feeling it pulse faintly with retained heat, and believes without question that this, at least, will stand forever. The inundations came as ever, but the royal storerooms at Memphis no longer overflowed. What grain arrived was thinner, paler, sometimes blighted, and the scribes who once counted by the thousands now ticked nervous columns in the low hundreds. South of the capital, provincial governors had learned to solve their own shortages. They dug new canals without royal permission, levied local taxes, paid masons to carve their names deeper than any kings into cliffside chapels. In distant tomb scenes, a subtle rebellion shows itself. Nomarchs seated the same height as Pharaoh, wives painted in the full blossom of lotus blue, normally reserved for queens. On festival days, their musicians struck copper cymbals so loudly that Memphis could pretend not to hear the insult. Along the West Bank at Asyut, a middle-aged accountant named Keti rises before dawn, long before the market vendors light their reed wick lamps. Keti is thin-wristed but sharp-eyed. He learned his fractions on palimpsest ostraca, memorized every sign of the offering formula, and now manages the storage magazines of a local strongman who styles himself Great Chief of the Oryx Nome. His ledgers tell a delicate story. River readings too low by a handspan, barley reserves down a third, copper blades ordered from the Delta but never delivered. Each week he walks the quay and watches grain boats that once sailed under royal flags, now bearing crudely painted jackal emblems, or worse, none at all. He knows the balance of Maat is tipping. In private, he copies passages of the coffin texts, spells once reserved for kings, onto scraps of papyrus, hopeful insurance for a soul that can no longer trust the central government to guarantee eternity. When famine tightens further and cattle herds shrink to bone, Keti's master dispatches emissaries to Heracleopolis, bargaining for armed alliances. Farther south, a rival family in Thebes gathers priests, speaks of loyalty to Amun, and whispers that the true balance of the two lands can be restored only by Upper Egypt. Dowries are exchanged, ferry boats full of archers slide through the reeds at night, and temples begin to date their receipts by both kings' regnal years, hedging bets until the dust settles. It does not settle quickly. Skirmishes scar canal banks, tombs are plundered for their copper fittings, and coffins, painted just 2 generations before, appear in black market stalls at Abydos. Yet culture refuses to wither. In village courtyards, women still grind emmer beneath heavy stones, while children recite schoolboy satchels of maxims. Do not darken your heart with theft. A good reputation outlives fine linen. Potteries at Aswan turn out red slip bowls as thin as eggshells, painted with whirl motifs that spin like the sun itself. Even hardship finds its poets. Somewhere near Akhmim, an anonymous writer crafts The Eloquent Peasant, a tale of justice so keen that later ages will memorize it for courtroom rhetoric. After nearly a century of divided crowns, a Theban prince named Mentuhotep marshals every skiff and chariot he can, threads his banners up the river, and takes Heracleopolis in a single hard flood season. With that victory, the two lands breathe together again. Mentuhotep builds a mortuary terrace against the cliffs of Deir el-Bahri, where pillars march like orderly date palms into shadow. He commands his artists to invent a new kind of portrait. The king shown in rich, dark ochre, flesh of fertile soil, arms crossed in eternal vigilance. Soldiers returning from the north are rewarded with parcels of land, and scribes revise the tax registers to include fields long ignored by Memphis clerks. The calendar is set back in order. Year 1 of the reunited kingdom. A generation later, a different kind of mind reshapes power. Amenemhat, born of modest stock, founds a fresh capital near the Fayum and names it Ichtawi, Caesar of the Two Lands. His viziers draft edicts so meticulous they rival engineering blueprints. Embankments here, sluice gates there, grain depots placed at intervals no ox cart can exceed in a single day's travel. Under his rule, surveyors hammer boundary stelae around Lake Moeris, reclamation transforming marsh into a checkerboard of barley and flax. Shipwrights in Royal Basset fell Lebanon cedar, floating whole trunks through the delta channels, their resin scent lingering behind supply convoys like spice. Foreign trade revives. Minoan pottery appears in palace kitchens, and diplomats return from Byblos speaking of silver axes inlaid with electrum lightning. For ordinary people, life finds a steadier cadence. South of Lisht, in a village hemmed by pomegranate groves, lives a weaver named Senet, whose loom beats like a steady heart. Each morning she ties warps of flax so fine she must wet her fingers to grip them. While she works, she listens to her 8-year-old son rehearse his hieratic exercises, fragile brush strokes of duck, basket, mouth. Because every family who can spare a bright child now dreams of pushing him toward the scribal schools where future inspectors and accountants are minted. Senet's husband serves in a rotating militia filey. Once every 2 months, he shoulders a quiver and patrols mud brick forts along the eastern desert road, watching for the donkey caravans of Bedouin tribes whose incursions have grown bold since the land recovered its riches. He is paid in salt cakes and a ration of beer thick enough to stand a reed straw upright, and on the morning he returns, Senet dyes a batch of linen violet with crushed mollusk shells, a shade reserved by decree for favored households, yet common enough now that the dyers whisper about new regulations soon to come. The arts flourish with surprising luxury. High in a tower room at Ichtawi, a royal calligrapher polishes a tale that opens in exile and ends in mercy. Sinuhe, courtier turned fugitive who flees across the Sinai sands, thrives among Asiatic allies, and comes home at last to die beneath native stars. His sentences glide like kite strings on a clear day. School children will struggle over them for centuries, and foreign linguists in distant empires will puzzle their declensions long after the silt has choked the canals he knew. Yet in the scriptorium downstairs, a different papyrus scroll warns of political fragility. Beware of the time to come. The Nile may swell, but hearts are dry. Amenemhat himself is stabbed in a palace conspiracy, and his son Sesostris must share a throne during his father's living years, a co-regency invented to cushion succession shocks. Sesostris, strong-armed, surveyor-minded, leads campaigns deep into Nubia, carving triumphant stelae next to cataract whirlpools. He drags a granite block 50 cubits high from Aswan, sledges it across a causeway greased with sycamore milk, then watches masons coax its sides into a needle so sharp it seems to pierce more sky than stone. In the Levant, he fortifies narrow passes with mud brick bastions called the Walls of the Ruler. Prisoners of war march home with laissez-passer tablets slung like dog tags. Some become field hands, others brickmakers pounding Nile clay with straw until the sun clamps it hard as bone. In annual reports, scribes differentiate between gold of Southland mines and electrum-like morning, between fine acacia honey and bee bread set aside for the temple of Neith. Bureaucracy has reached a new sophistication. Regional tax ledgers cross-reference labor drafts, and a miscount of 2 goats in the Oryx Gnome warehouse can ripple up the chain to the vizier's hearing. Into this intricate machine steps an ambitious architect named Anku, who believes mud brick pyramids can rival stone if only the casing is precise and the mortuary cult adequately endowed. He oversees a crew that stacks giant adobe cores at Dashur, then sheathes them in gleaming Tura limestone. One autumn, his tally sheets list 900 men for the main ramp, 400 plasterers, and 32 scribes dividing their time between grain allotments and the temple library, where flood levels are archived on palm fiber cords. When Anku's wife dies in childbirth, he sketches her funerary stela himself, adding a single lotus that opens toward the rising sun. Visitors centuries later will marvel at the delicacy of its unpainted lines, unable to guess that the artist once directed an army of 2,000 laborers by signaling with a horn carved from cedar. Songs change as prosperity relaxes discipline. Work gang chants praise Sesostris, but also flirt braggingly with the brewer's daughter who hands out jugs at noon. In the evening, on reed mats beside canal water that smells of crushed marjoram, farmers share rumors of fantastical islands where gemstones grow on trees and serpents speak in riddles. Sailors returning from Byblos swear that in foreign harbors, Egyptian grain is worth more than gold. An elderly priest at Heliopolis crunches numbers on the cycle of Sirius and predicts the next inundation within 3 days, accuracy so uncanny that peasants bring him newborn goats to bless. Somewhere in a lesser temple, 2 apprentices quibble over the correct form of the sign for to give, and a passing master says, only half joking, if you carve it wrong, the goddess may withhold the flood. Yet stability, like finely beaten gold leaf, is thin. Late in the dynasty, a rash of short-lived kings takes the throne, their regnal names fading on building blocks before masons finish setting the mortar. Asiatic traders, once content with delta entrepôts, establish walled quarters and hire local guards. A caravan from Kush arrives bearing gold so pure that thieves trail it for weeks, cutting waterskins at night to slow defenders. Along the eastern border, archivists record the first sightings of a spoked wheel drawn by a chariot team. Lighter, faster, deadlier than any cart in Egypt's arsenal. In quiet hallways of the palace granary, the most anxious scribes begin epistolary prayers to the goddess Seshat, begging that ink outlast upheaval. Northeast winds carry whispers of a new ruling house in the delta, foreign in speech, yet swift to learn Egyptian titles. Meanwhile, in a limestone courtyard at Ichtawi, Senet's son, grown tall, hair braided under a novice clerk's cap, copies tax codes onto fresh scrolls and wonders why grain shipments from the north have not arrived on schedule. He draws a glyph for storm in the margin, enlarges it thoughtfully, then crosses it out and substitutes change. The sun drops behind the pylons. Geese splash in an irrigation ditch that never knew famine, and the pages on his low desk rustle with evening air, as though the papyrus itself is restless for the news tomorrow will bring. Clouds from the north carried a taste of salt that was new to Delta farmers, and with them came wagons unlike any cart Egypt had seen. Light wooden frames, 4 spokes to a wheel, a pair of small horses harnessed chest to chest, so the driver stood between their flanks, and the archer beside him could pivot in a half-circle without loosening his stance. People in the market at Hutwaret stopped measuring fish to watch these newcomers roll past. The sound of iron-shod rims on limestone pavement was a kind of music they could not name. The strangers paid in silver rings clipped from spiral coils, weighed their onions with pebble counters, and spoke a swift, consonant-heavy language that left no room for the long vowels Egyptians used when bartering. Within a generation, the town was called Avaris, and the newcomers were Hyksos, Hekaukasut, rulers of foreign lands. Yet by then, their scarab seals already impressed papyrus treaties. Their composite bows hung in temple armories, and their princes walked the palace corridors in linen kilts so finely pleated that only the scent of pine gum marked them as alien. On a spring morning, a chariot groom named Rehut stands ankle-deep in straw behind the Hyksos stables, braiding rawhide for a girth strap. He is Egyptian by birth, but earns triple a field hand's wage because his fingers understand the difference between sweat-softened leather and desert-dried hide. Rehut whistles to calm the Nubian ponies, checks the layered horn of a recurve bow for splinters, and snaps a copper plaque into place on the yoke. When the garrison drills, he runs beside the wheels to sponge the hubs with tallow so hot spokes do not seize. In the evenings, he leans against cedar posts and listens to his overseers debate which gods rule the sky beyond Byblos. He decides it makes no difference, because every horse in the world lowers its head the same way when a hand offers barley. Far upriver, Thebes watches, wary and indignant. Its kings hold only a sliver of the valley, yet still style themselves heirs of the two ladies, and date documents from the reign of distant Ra. In the moonlit corridors of a modest palace, Sekenenre Tau studies dispatches. Hyksos patrols have seized grain barges past Kusei. Their viceroy in the delta claims Papyrus stands as royal forest. The king cannot act. His army owns 3 chariots total, all copies built from memory and optimism. Unable to wield blades, Sekenenre sharpens stories instead. He sends a message back north, jesting that the hippos in Thebes splash so loudly they keep the Hyksos pharaoh Apophis awake at night. Apophis answers with threats wrapped in sarcasm, and the insult travels along the river faster than any flotilla. Steel-blue dragonflies skim the water when Sekenenre's war canoes shove off their moorings. The king kneels beneath a leather awning and prays to Montu for strength. Archers kneel around him, fletching reed shafts with vulture feathers. They reach Dendera before Hyksos scouts spot the keels, and the first skirmish of a civil war that will last a lifetime stains the cane brakes red. Sekenenre will die with an axe wound in the temple so deep the embalmer must pack resin into the cracked bone, but Kamose, and after him, Amose, refuse surrender. From the sandstone ridges at Gebelane to the mud-brick walls of Avaris, Theban banners advance year on year. Amose's engineers copy Hyksos siege ramps, stone for stone, then add fire pots lobbed by slings. One night when the moon rises half full over the marsh, smoke from burning palisades curls into the sky like a second river. At dawn, Hyksos elites flee east. Egyptian infantry pour through breaches paved with cedar boards, slick with dew, and the delta is Egyptian again for the first time in a century. Amose remembers famine years. His coronation feast is measured, not lavish, but he understands symbols. He orders a pyramidion of electrum set on the ruined step pyramid at Saqqara, so sunrise gleams across the whole Memphite plain as if rebirth is tangible. In Nubia, he reforges garrisons abandoned since Old Kingdom quarries collapsed. In Sinai, he reopens turquoise mines and builds a temple to Hathor that glitters with wall inlays of feldspar and silver. To pay his veterans, he grants land near new canals. Dusty plots soon bloom with emmer and pomegranate. Widows turn regimental bracelets into temple votives, trusting the state that took their husbands will guard their sons. In these calmer years, Amenhotep, son of Amosa, consecrates a new necropolis in the western cliffs opposite Thebes. No longer pyramids exposed to theft, but rock-cut chambers hidden behind switchback valleys. Villagers south of the cliffs lease huts to teams of diggers who follow the smell of damp gypsum and the echo of pick on shale. One boy among them, named Pa Nedjem, carries waterskins uphill twice a day, his toes bleeding from scree, until a foreman notices his habit of tracing columns of numbers in the dust with a twig. Pa Nedjem is drafted into the scribe school, where he learns to ink inventory on wooden tags shaped like funerary sandals, lamp oil, natron, beef cuts, linen rolls. He dreams of writing hymns, but finds comfort in prices that balance. Thutmose I, who once rode as general up the corridor of retinue, inherits the double crown and decides empire should be more than tribute. His war barges navigate the Euphrates. He watches snow melt off distant ranges and claims the rising spray is incense meant for Amun. At Kurgus, he erects a stela so high even floodwaters cannot erase it, and beside the text, his artisans carve a relief where captives kneel in rows so small they look like tally marks. Some will become draft labor for canals near the Fayum. Others tutors in court workshops teaching Akkadian cuneiform to bright Egyptian youths. On the morning news of Thutmose's death reaches Deir el-Medina, stone-setters pause their mallets mid-swing. The village physician crushes lotus seeds into wine for grief's sleeplessness. The foreman posts a ration increase to keep idle hands from rumor. Hatshepsut, widow of Thutmose II and aunt to the boy king Thutmose III, first stands behind a thin linen screen as regent, and then steps forward wearing the ceremonial beard carved from pasteboard and gold leaf. She does not bother pretending meekness. Craftsmen in Karnak receive commissions for obelisks tall enough to lance the sky. Quarry crews at Aswan saw granite with dolerite balls until grooves deepen and blocks break clean. In her 6th regnal year, she launches a fleet down the Red Sea, past baboon-haunted capes to the aromatic groves of Punt. When those ships return, they carry myrrh trees with roots balled in river mud, gold rings as wide as a man's wrist, and painted tails of marvels, panther skins black as midnight, incense cones that smolder without flame, dwarfs who sing in voices like flutes. A gardener named Menkeper tends those myrrh saplings in terraces at Deir el-Bari. Dawn after dawn, he climbs limestone ramps, uses a goatskin bag to drip water at each trunk, and whispers praise so the young trees will believe they stand upon Punt's native cliffs. Sometimes he looks up at the colonnades where scribes gild reliefs of his own daily labor. Menkeper bowing to the queen as sap runs in fragrant beads down his knife. He wonders whether memory itself has smell, whether in an afterlife far from soil, the gods will ask why his palms always tasted of resin. Years pass. Thutmose III comes of age, leads 17 campaigns in 20 years, and keeps field diaries so detailed future generals will use them as manuals. At Megiddo, his officers debate whether to skirt a forested ridge. Thutmose rides straight through the pass, bottlenecks his army between limestone walls, and still reaches the city gates before dawn. The loot is so vast, accountants set up scales in the shadow of fig trees and weigh copper ingots until sweat stripes their kilts white. Back in Egypt, children memorize the phrase, "capture of Megiddo," the way later ages will chant, "crossing of Rubicon." Empire becomes routine. Tribute tables at Karnak list lapis from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, wine from Crete. An official at Byblos boasts that he can scent Cairo honey blindfolded. Another at Ulaza orders perishable figs packed in snow, shaved off Anatolian peaks, so they arrive fresh at Thebes 4 days later. Peace brings different ambitions. Amenhotep III surveys Thebes and decides a city that prays in mud brick is an insult to the gods. He commands whole enclosures faced in white quartzite, courts paved with alabaster so polished it mirrors afternoon clouds. His artisans cast faience tiles in colors that rival dragonfly wings: turquoise, apple green, deep plum. At Malkata, a palace blooms along the desert lake. Painted papyrus stalks climbing mud-plastered walls, colonnades striped like candy cane, alabaster window grills fit with translucent calcite. At dusk, the king sails his royal bark across an artificial lagoon while dwarfs keep rhythm on bronze cymbals and Syrian dancers balance scented oil cones on black wigs. Diplomats from Mitanni present mares trained to kneel. Hittite envoys offer iron daggers, feather Damascus patterned in smoke. The treasury melts surplus gold into small scarabs stamped with slogans: Nebmatra, dazzling sun. In a shed behind the palace workshops, a beadmaker named Satni heats crushed quartz with natron and malachite leavings. Her kiln is a clay drum fed with acacia charcoal. When the temperature hums like cicadas, she threads the molten paste onto bronze wires that leave eyes so perfect no string will abrade them. Satni has never seen the sea, but she rolls shell patterns across cooling beads with a dogfish spine and imagines waves speaking foreign vowels. On moon-rich nights, she walks home across gypsum yard dust, glowing pale as newborn milk. Pockets rattling with imperfect beads, she will trade at market for garlic and goose fat. She wonders if any goddess collects the shards craftsmen drop. Invisible mosaic for an afterlife courtyard. While Thebes gorges on sun-lit luxury, Western villages whisper of a new cult taking shape in festival hymns. The Aten, a disk of pure light, whose rays end in tiny hands cupping ankhs to royal nostrils. Amenhotep's placid son, Crown Prince Amenhotep, drifts through palace courts in pleated gowns, listening more to musicians than to priests. He watches imported glass glimmer under torchlight and decides color itself is prayer. In the 5th year of his reign, he will rename himself Akhenaten and build a city where no gods but light may dwell. For now the priests of Amun still ring half of Thebes with incense, but their songs thicken with apprehension. Their treasurers audit gold shipments twice, then thrice. In the quiet before that storm, Pa-Nedjem, now a middle-aged foreman at the royal necropolis, approves the layout of a new tomb corridor that veers north to avoid a fault line. He dines on roast pigeon in a lamplit courtyard, while his grown daughter Coax teaches her toddler hieroglyphs, using a broken ostrakon as slate. Far away, Satni twists a silver wire through a bead the color of midday sky, and sets it aside without knowing it will adorn a princess who chants to a son no one has yet dared call sole lord. And in the delta, Where Hyksos fort walls have been leveled into barley fields, Rehut's grandson shoes ceremonial horses in gold-tipped leather. He tells them stories of wheels inventing empire, wheels shattering thrones, and how every reign seems permanent until the moment a spoke snaps where no one thought to look. When the court finally moved into the unfinished city of Akhetaten, the air shimmered with gypsum dust and freshly burnt bricks. Houses sprang up in white rows so quickly that boundary stelae marking the limits of the horizon. City were still damp with plaster. Akhenaten walked barefoot along the royal road each dawn, elbows lifted, palms open to the sun, chanting praises that made courtiers bend double to catch their breath in the furnace glare. Artists abandoned the old canon of proportions. They carved family scenes under grape arbors where the king and Nefertiti kissed the brows of 6 daughters. Rib bones and soft bellies shone without apology. The Aten's rays ending in tiny hands that tipped ankhs toward their upturned faces. Not everyone bent so willingly. In the great temple of Amun at Karnak, columns the thickness of redwood trunks listened to prayers whispered behind closed screens. Priests hid silver cult statues beneath floor slabs. Records speak of clerks striking the god's name from ration lists at spear point, then re-inking it the moment inspectors rode away. Carvers at Akhetaten shipped empty limestone blocks meant for ancestral gods to the capital and recut them with sun-wheel cartouches, unaware that decades later masons would chisel these blocks back out. One side Atenist, the other Orthodox, like double-faced memories pressed together by politics. A teenage incense girl named Mary Sopdet spent her first months in Akhetaten, carrying baskets of blue lotus to way stations along the royal road. She learned to step around pot shards still hot from kilns, to keep dust from settling on the perfumed petals by wringing her scarf with water before sunrise. In the evenings, she traded leftover buds for lentil pancakes in the sculptor quarter, where limestone curls drifted like white feathers, and apprentices practiced the exaggerated Atenist profiles on river pebbles. Mary Sopdet collected the prettiest rejects and lined them on her window ledge, little moon-white faces smiling at nothing as the day's heat bled off the walls. But new faith is fragile when built on a single heartbeat. In the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, a plague, perhaps smallpox transported by caravans from the Levant, swept through the delta marshes, then up the valley. 2 of the royal daughters died within weeks. Court musicians blackened their eyelids with ash instead of coal. Akhenaten came to the balcony to declare Aten mercy incarnate, yet rumor crawled faster than decree. The old gods were angry. The Nile's pulse was weakening. The Aten's light burned crops instead of blessing them. Grain prices doubled. Scribes recorded thefts of barley straight from the threshing floors. When the pharaoh died, his body entombed beneath a shattered cliff where ravens nested, the capital held its breath. Tutankhamun, a child with eyes too big for his skull, sat on the throne flanked by Vizier's Eye and Horemheb. Before the 3rd inundation, the boy king's name changed. Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, and the court packed its files for Thebes. Akhetaten's avenues emptied so quickly that desert sand drifted across thresholds still strewn with ostraca and half-painted stelae. Mary Sopdet, now 17, followed a caravan of sculptors back to Memphis. She threw her pebble portraits one by one into the river during the journey, watching each vanish beneath eddies the color of bruised iron. Restoration meant compromise. Temples to the Aten were plastered over or converted into sun courts for Ra. Coffers ransacked during the revolution were politely returned under seal. High priests of Amun delivered sermons heavy with forgiveness and the unspoken price of it. Tutankhamun's artisans inlaid his coffins with lapis and carnelian, but the treasury could not finance a pyramid, so builders hollowed a narrow shaft in the Valley of the Kings and lined it with yellow stucco that flaked at every hammer blow. I took the throne 9 years later, married the boy's widow to legitimize his claim, and commissioned a colossal scarab proclaiming, "He who keeps the land alive." Few listened. Horemheb, commander of armies, returned from garrison duty in the north and seized power with the support of officers weary of priestly intrigue. He erased Ai's cartouches, chopped Akhenaten's name from boundary markers, and laid the legal groundwork for a clean dynasty to follow. The House of Ramesses. Ramesses I ruled too briefly to plant roots, but his son Seti was granite made flesh. A soldier scholar, fluent in chariot drill and temple liturgy. He led campaigns into Syria, where Amorite chiefs folded at the sight of embossed gold axe heads, then marched south to Nubia, where cataract rapids echoed with the crack of fire-hardened arrows. Seti's memorial temple at Abydos rose with walls carved so deeply that the bas-reliefs threw shadows by moonlight. Painters applied 6 layers of white gesso before a single ochre stroke. In a side corridor, apprentices etched the Abydos king list, a genealogy reaching back to gods, minus, carefully, the heretic kings of Amarna, whose absence told its own story in stone. Seti's son, Ramesses II, inherited more than a throne. He inherited an empire stretched taut as bowstring and alliances stitched with thin thread. Even as a teenager in the Delta garrison, he inspected granaries at dawn, counted arrow bundles, and corrected papyrus manifests in red ink. On campaign, he slept in a portable shrine shaped like a miniature palace, walls painted with stars, so he always dreamed beneath heaven. Year 5 of his reign brought the showdown the chariot age had been edging toward. Kadesh, a fortress town on the Orontes River held by the Hittite king Muwatalli. Dawn on the Kadesh plain smelled of crushed wild mint and horse sweat. Ramesses, bold almost to recklessness, rode ahead of his divisions with the Amun Corps, unaware that Hittite chariots, 300 heavy wagons, lay massed behind the city. The ambush shattered dust into gold-flecked clouds. Egyptian spearmen buckled under iron-shod wheels. In the swirl, Ramesses stood on his chariot floor, bow bending in machine rhythm, arrows loosed as fast as servants could notch them. Hieroglyphic records claim Amun himself appeared in a cloud of glory, but modern tallies suggest Ramesses rallied stray companies from the Ptah and Set divisions, countercharged, and held the ford until dusk. The battle ended in stalemate, yet the treaty signed 16 years later, carved in both cuneiform and hieroglyphs, stands as the oldest known surviving peace accord. At Pi-Ramesses, the new Delta capital, sculptors carved colossi so huge that a man could stand inside the curled ear and hear stone echo his heartbeat. Streets were laid wide enough for 6 chariots abreast. Canals ferried pallets of cedar roof beams to palaces where lapis-inlaid floor tiles reflected torchlight. Potters experimented with glass spangled by air bubbles like trapped stars. The best pieces were shipped to Hatti as part of the peace dowry, along with a princess whose dowry lists included a lapdog, 10 throwing sticks, and a full cosmetic chest of unguents. But grandeur is expensive. At Deir el-Medina, the artisans responsible for royal tombs expected monthly rations of barley, dried fish, beer, and fuel. In year 29, the deliveries stopped. Days stretched. Bellies shrank. The workmen downed tools, marched to the mortuary temple of Medinet Habu, and staged the world's first documented labor strike. They shouted grievances recorded on papyrus. "We are hungry. 18 days have elapsed this month." Officials scrambled to release emergency grain from hidden reserves. Wages resumed, and the tomb corridor walls filled again with scenes of skyboats and sacred lakes. Yet the paint hide's hairline cracks. The state's wealth, once measured in granite and lapis, was thinning into parchment promises. Far outside the valley, storms brewed. Merchants from coastal Ugarit arrived in Pyramesses with rumors of burning cities to the north, of bronze shields washed ashore beside charred timbers. Years later, scribes would label the invaders sea peoples, but nobody, then or now, could map their origins cleanly. They came in wagons and ships, carrying families as well as spears, a migration war tucked inside wind-ripped sails. Rameses III, grandson of the Great, met them with fortified beachheads at the mouths of the delta. Naval archers perched on ship rigging like herons, loosing arrows into crowded enemy decks. Reliefs at Medinet Habu show the chaos. Oared war galleys colliding, feather-crested helmets toppling as bodies pitched into Nile spray thickened by blood. Egypt survived, barely, but timber lines and temple records shorten each decade. Cedars vanish, replaced by acacia ribs half the strength. In a small delta marsh, a fisherman named Hori repairs nets under a sky streaked by early winter geese. He has never seen the royal fleet, but he trades fish for arrows at an army depot and notices the bronze heads are now recast from melted statues. One bears an Aten hand barely filed down. His wife unravels palace-issue linen to weave sail patches. The cloth smells faintly of cedar chests that once stood in princess dowries. Their eldest daughter sketches fish scales with a burnt reed on scraps of broken amphora, dreaming of scribal school. But the local teacher has joined a caravan south, chasing safer wages in Nubia, where gold dust still settles in river bends like dawn pollen. Under Rameses XI, the priesthood of Amun holds more grain than the throne, and the vizier in the north, a man named Smendis, rules as though Thebes were already a separate world. Temple diaries mention robberies in royal tombs, sarcophagi pried with copper bars under moonlight. When inspectors open the violated chambers, they move the mummies to hidden caches, stripping gold masks, packing bones in sand-filled boxes like contraband memories. In the village at Deir el-Medina, last of the artisan families seals its door, leaving ostraca scattered on the floor. Pay lists, love poems, gambling tallies. A final note, ink browned by desert air, reads simply, "The water is finished." Centuries will pass before Greek tourists scratch their names into colossal ankles, before Roman governors tax grain for an empire across the sea. But already the new kingdom, the empire of millions of years, has folded into itself like a lotus at dusk, petals curling tight around the scent of yesterday's sun. In remote shrines, Old priests still whisper Ramesses the Great's names to fading wall paint, yet a novice sweeping sand from the threshold pauses to wonder why the echoes feel thinner each season, as if even stone has begun to forget the stories carved upon its skin. Low Nile dawn folds over the ruins of Pyramesses, and the capital's stone lions watch fishermen pole flat-bottom skiffs across drowned streets where colossi once cast noon-length shadows. The great palace is silent now. Cedar roofs collapsed beneath years of winter rain, leaving gold leaf wall inlays to peel like scales from a forgotten serpent. Yet life does not pause. On the sand-choked eastern quay, a river pilot named Jed Konsu bends to repaint his private cargo boat, brushing bitumen across sycamore planks he salvaged from a temple trellis. He flies 2 flags, one bearing the cartouche of Smendes, new king of the north, and another stitched with the spiraled ram horn of Amun, whose high priest rules Thebes 600 river miles away. Dual loyalty is good business in fractured times. Jed Konsu's manifests record strange pairings, crates of papyrus barter-marked with holy oil from Karnak, baskets of dried fish taxed by Tanite inspectors, and once a rolled bronze door hinge inscribed with Ramesses the Great's throne name, now commodity like any other. At night he moors beside floating markets strung with lamps, where Libyan mercenaries gamble cowrie shells against barley cakes, and Nubian gold washers pour flecks of dust onto copper scales no heavier than a sigh. Nations have splintered, but the river still carries everything that breathes. South at Thebes, High Priest Pinagem conducts a festival procession lit by tallow torches, whose smoke veils statues lifted on gilded barks. His sons serve as generals, governors, even nominal royal sons of Kush, and while papyrus letters address him as servant of Amun, his seal ring bears full cartouches. In practice, he is pharaoh of Upper Egypt. When the star Sothis flashes near dawn, he orders a census of temple herds, then signs a decree that reduces grain taxes for the widows of tomb workers now scattered across oases. Royal titles fracture like pottery under heat. King in Tanis, king in Thebes, kings in name only wherever bronze-gripped authority can hold a prefecture for a season. Into this divided land ride Libyan chiefs, the Meshwesh and Libu, once desert fighters, now settled warlords whose sons speak Egyptian in the marketplace and quote ancestral proverbs around hearth smoke. Shoshenq, grandson of a chieftain, marries into the Tanite line and consolidates power not by conquest, but by ledger and alliance. Scribes list his gifts to Amun in ink thicker than blood. He grants the high priesthood to his own son, compressing crown and altar under one family seal. When rebellion sparks in Judah, he marches through the Levant, pries gold from Solomon's temple doors, and records tribute on Bubastite portal walls, where registers run like account columns across sandstone ribs. Yet back home, floodwaters recede erratically. Provincial strongholds ignore edicts, and archers once loyal to Pybast now hire themselves to whichever nome supplies the best beer. In the western delta, a bowmaker named Jonifer carves horn tips imported from Cyrene, gluing layers with fish bladder glue that reeks for days. He has never seen the Syrian forts Shoshenq boasts of sacking, but each foreign victory empties quiver racks in local armories and sends soldiers clamoring for new composite bows. Janifer's daughter writes orders in Demotic on potsherds, one for a Libyan garrison, one for an Amun priest's bodyguard, one for a petty king upriver who calls himself master of the whole 2 lands, though he rules barely 20 villages. Bow staves cross the delta like rumors, bending toward whichever hand pays quickest. To the far south, the black land of Kush gathers strength beyond Egypt's 3rd cataract. In Napata, a Nubian king named Paye reads star maps on a stone terrace cooled by desert wind. He studies Orion's rising and decides the gods have weighed Egypt and found it wanting. His scribes draft a proclamation. He will sail north like a falcon in a storm to restore Mat. Kushite armies move on sandals of braided palm. War horses, smaller than Asiatic breeds but tireless, splash through cataract shallows without breaking formation. Cities surrender by ritual, doors unbarred, earth kissed, walls washed with perfumed water. At Memphis, Pai pauses to feed his horses barley sprinkled with wine. He writes scornfully that northern kings live like fattened bulls, yet he spares their lives, seals their oaths on bronze plaques, and returns to Napata trailing cedar incense plumes across the river night. His successor Taharqa dreams even larger. From Thebes to Tanis, steles proclaim him son of Amun. Masons reactivate quarry teams in Gebel Barkal to carve ram-headed sphinxes whose granite hides shimmer black-green in dawn light. In the delta, he digs new dikes against salt tide, plants groves of sycamore to buffer east winds, and funds restoration of Ta's temple, where ivy had crept between lintels. In Assyria, however, a hawk-eyed king named Esarhaddon views Egypt as the hinge of world dominion. He marshals siege engines taller than date palms, iron armors that laugh at bronze, and soldiers fed on barley beer thickened with goat fat. Crossing Sinai, the Assyrians batter Pelusium's mud brick walls until defenders melt like wax. Memphis falls. Taharqa retreats south. When Assurbanipal sacks Thebes 12 years later, loot caravans stretch beyond sight. Obelisks sawn into thirds, papyrus archives stacked like firewood, statues of pharaohs dragged by ropes until their crowns crack against paving stones. The city's priests kneel in dust, whispering hymns no conqueror can translate, trying to anchor gods in silence. Yet fragility breeds reinvention. In the delta marshes, a family from Sais rises under Psamtik, who courts Greek hoplite mercenaries from Ionia and Caria. Iron helmets and round shields, strange on Egyptian soil, flash atop city walls. Their bronze-rimmed lyres pluck evening airs around campfires that smell of garlic and pine resin. Psamtik opens Nile harbors to Aegean traders, taxes cargo in silver drachma as well as deben of copper, and funnels revenue into a navy. Rowers chained not by force, but by wages better than any village field can promise. Suez fashions itself a Renaissance capital. Scribes copy Old Kingdom wisdom texts onto fresh papyrus. Sculptors revive archaic smiling mouths in basalt. And priests restore Saqqara step mastabas with new limestone brighter than the first dawn they ever saw. In a port warehouse at Naucratis, a Greek clerk named Demetrios learns enough Demotic to tally incense logs from Punt beside amphorae of Chian wine. He swaps olive oil for papyrus sheets, writes home about ibis birds that fish by torchlight, and carves Aphrodite's name in Greek letters next to Hathor's cow horn on a shared altar. Cultures interlace like warp and weft. Egyptian goldsmiths adopt Greek satyr masks for belt clasps. Ionian potters paint lotus petals between meanders. Traders debate over beer sweetened with dates whether the Nile or the Aegean holds the more gracious gods. Persia eyes this rejuvenated realm with archers drawn. Cambyses pushes across Sinai dunes in 525 BCE, entering Memphis under a sky the color of forged iron. Psamtik III is led captive. The Apis bull, sick with age, is mocked by soldiers who do not fear the thunder of Egyptian curses. Yet even Persia recognizes Nile wealth. Satraps administer through existing temples. Aramaic scribes share office benches with priests of Thoth. Gold flows east as tribute, but record-keeping remains painstakingly Egyptian. Revolts flare, Inaros of Athribis, Amyrtaeus of Sais, each crushed yet leaving scars deep as irrigation ditches. Between wars, working people adapt. A potter in Elephantine stamps jars with both the winged disk of Ahura Mazda and the lotus papyrus emblem, hedging eternity across pantheons. In twilight, after a minor skirmish near Mendes, a medic named Bastet Hotep grinds pomegranate bark with vinegar to wash an archer's arrow wound. The soldier is Carian, speaks no Egyptian beyond market curses, yet thanks her by tracing a bull's head in dust, their shared talisman against fever. She wonders how many gods can inhabit one narrow reed hut at once. Isis over her doorway, Ahura Mazda on the archer's bronze buckle, Athena inked on a merchant's scarred forearm. Somewhere in Sais, archivists add another royal name under Great King of Kings, and account keepers strike out Psamtik's tally marks, but Bastet Hotep is busy coaxing flesh to knit. 70 years later, the Persians fall to Alexander's cutting sweep. Macedonian banners ripple beside papyrus barges. Alexandria rises in limestone arcs so new they smell of sea salt and freshly quarried dreams. Yet in forgotten field shrines, a priest still pours a libation to Taharka's ram spirit, and in Napata, astrologers cast horoscopes by the same star tables Paye once studied on a wind-cool night. Egypt endures by shifting shape. Many crowns, many gods, one river curling endless between walls of sand, its story rewritten by every foreign tongue, yet always beating with the quiet pulse of silt and sunrise. Incense clings to the humidity over Alexandria's newborn quays, mingling with brine and the sweet rot of seaweed caught in bronze anchor rings. Macedonian architects have traced streets in a perfect grid, paving them with limestone that still gleams sugar white where the waves haven't yet flung salt across the blocks. Ptolemy, former general and now satrap, surveys the work from a makeshift balcony lashed to cedar scaffolding. He imagines these avenues thronged by every language poured out of Alexander's old empire. When he turns inland, the sun flashes across piles of papyrus rolls stacked under awnings. The first acquisitions for a library, scholars say, will collect every word worth keeping in the world. A tax collector named Zenon greets each arriving galley with the same ritual. A palm-sized clay seal pressed to the ship's manifest, a second seal snapped onto any book the captain carries for pleasure reading. The scrolls are confiscated, copied overnight by scribes who work by fish oil lamps, then returned at dawn with an apology and the copy filed into the library. Zenon grumbles that imported tragedies cost more than barley now, yet the clerks shrug. Knowledge, they say, is grain for the mind, and the king feeds minds the way the Nile feeds fields. 20 years on, marble colonnades lace the shoreline, and the lighthouse of Pharaohs spears above harbor masts, its mirrored beacon blazing by night like a tethered comet. Beneath it, in the canopic district flecked with bakeries, a merchant named Callias unlocks cedar shutters before sunrise. His shop smells of cumin, myrrh, and cold bronze coin. He trades in possibilities: ebony combs from Kush, amphorae of Lesbos wine, scrolls of Galenic herbs inked on goat parchment. By mid-morning, mixed accents batter his ears: Jewish merchants debating weight, Egyptian potters haggling for olive oil, Anatolian sailors singing rhymes that scan in trochaic feet. Greek has become the lingua franca, but prices dance along any syllable that carries silver. Callias keeps accounts in double columns, Greek on the left, Demotic Egyptian on the right, aware that a missing unit in either script can cost his license. He knows the tax tables by heart. So many drachma for incense, so many artaba for grain. When royal inspectors visit, he surrenders ledgers bound in Nile green leather. They nod at the arithmetic and ask about rumors of papyrus smuggled upriver for cheaper scribal wages. Callias shrugs, offers them candied dates. Corruption, like the desert wind, scours everyone eventually, but a little sugar makes it bearable. Above the agora, the Museion hums. Scroll-keepers weigh new papyri. Botanists press lotus petals between linen. Astronomers adjust bronze tubes toward a dawn star that glitters just long enough to chart precession. In a lecture hall lined with cedar benches, a poet from Cyrene declaims Homeric passages, while an Egyptian scribe annotates margins with glyphic glosses, infusing old epics with the flavor of ibis feathers and river reeds. Down the hall, Eratosthenes measures a bronze rod's shadow at noon, calculates Earth's girth within a whisper of truth, and then strolls to the docks to taste fresh figs because wonder, he says, is sharper when the mouth is sweet. Ptolemy II sponsors temple renovations far upriver, printing his name in both Greek capitals and hieroglyphic falcons. Priests of Philae respond by scripting hymns to Isis that rhyme equally in either tongue, gossiping that the gods themselves must now learn foreign meters. When a famine flickers at the margins of Fayum, granary seals are broken and wheat barges sail north escorted by mercenary hoplites whose iron helmets glare like dawn off water. The barges pass villages where children shout two names for the same sky, Petcha in Egyptian, Oranos in Greek, then chase dragonflies between flax rows plumed violet by evening dust. Decades ribbon past. Ptolemy IV inherits a court striped with rival tutors. He prefers theater to treaties and spends whole mornings rehearsing flute solos under grape arbors while ministers juggle frontier news. At Raphia, his army faces Antiochus III of Syria. Egyptian infantry, swollen by native levies and a brigade of Nubian archers, brace shield rims against bronze-shod phalanx pikes. The lines buckle, rally, bend again. Dust roils so thick that scorpions crawl onto abandoned helmets seeking air. Victory is Egyptian, but it tastes of copper and sweat. And when veterans limp home, they find taxes doubled to pay for imported war elephants that arrived too late to matter. From the delta marshes to the cliffs of Thebes, new revolts kindle like dry reeds. A stonecutter named Horwenifer crowns himself king in the south, minting coins with hieroglyphs no Ptolemaic mint master can read. Alexandria dispatches fleets. The upriver rebels dam canals, starve grain convoys, and hold festivals where bulls crowned with papyrus rosettes parade past broken statues of Greek victors. In response, the dynasty fortifies walls thicker than the great library's end stacks and hires Jewish cavalry from Judea who sing psalms over razor-edged spears. Amid tension, scholarship keeps its rhythm. A scribe named Ioret copies trilingual decrees, hieroglyphic, demotic, Greek, onto black basalt stelae. One of these, raised at a sun-dazzled temple in Mendes before being toppled by a flood and lost to the mud, will someday carry the key to understanding Egypt's deepest script. But Ioret merely checks for spelling errors and dreams of retiring to a date farm, where the only glyph she'll draw is the swirl of water poured from a jug. Ptolemy V is crowned as a boy, kneeling on a dais so high he cannot see the kneeling priests beyond incense haze. Regents issue edicts, labor conscription climbs, and Nile captains carve secret marks on cargo planks to cheat toll houses. In a cliffside soldiery at Elephantine, a woman named Tamut brews beer laced with coriander for the garrison, watches crocodiles glide under the moon, and counts the new stars foreign astrologers have named after heroes who never walked her sands. She saves copper coins in a linen pouch to purchase her freedom papers. Inflation gnaws the pouch lighter each season, but the weight of hope is stubborn. When Cleopatra VII ascends, the dynasty's Greek veneer already shows stress fractures. Cleopatra's court speaks at least 9 tongues. She bargains with Nabatean caravanners in Aramaic, debates Stoic logic with philosophers in flawless Attic Greek, and performs ritual for Apis priests in Egyptian smooth enough to curl incense smoke. Alexandria buzzes with rumor. A woman on the throne, a queen who studies mechanics and commands storm-damaged triremes to be winched upright with cranes Archimedes might have envied. Grain ships once again sail packed to Roman harbors, but their cargo buys loyalty less than it feeds the appetites of senators. Julius Caesar arrives in pursuit of Pompey and finds the library flickering with lamplight despite riots at the docks. Streets ignite, warehouses burn, scroll cupboards smolder in purple towers of smoke that writhe against the lighthouse beam. Caesar's marines flood alleys to secure the palace quarter, dragging ballista frames through fish markets where skates still quiver on hooks. Cleopatra sails into the harbor sewn into a linen sack, steps onto marble polished slick by salt wind, and speaks Latin so soft Caesar must lean close to hear packed terms between crackle and hiss of torches. 9 months later, a son is born, and Alexandria's gossip mills grind sweet and bitter. Senators mutter of Eastern witchcraft. Dock workers bet double pay on whether Rome will claim the child. Caesar dies beneath daggers in the theater of Pompey, and Mark Antony rises, iron-jawed and lion-voiced, promising to make the Eastern Mediterranean Roman marble from end to end. He finds Cleopatra on a gilded barge drifted in jasmine-scented air. Musicians pluck chords that ripple across water and into legend. For a while, Egypt's coffers flow west again. Grain, papyrus, alabaster perfume bottles shaped like gazelle legs. But Rome's coffers have deeper throats, and Octavian's patience is stone. At Actium, the sea hisses beneath rocking hulls. Cleopatra's fleet carries purple sails. The dye bleeds into spray, so every tack streaks violet ghosts across the waves. Roman rams split timbers. Fire arrows lift salt vapor into steam clouds. In the smoke, Cleopatra cuts east with 60 ships. Antony cleaves after, leaving Egyptian decks shattered behind them. Octavian claims the strait, then the coast, Then the delta, where towns surrender after token siege. Alexandria opens gates. The lighthouse extinguishes its beacon one last time for an army that arrives by sunrise. Legionary boots stamp marble corridors once polished by candlelight and philosophy. Cleopatra seals herself in a high chamber, hung with star maps penciled in silver. No asps will ever testify, but legends coil tighter than bite marks. Octavian kneels beside Antony's body, orders mummification according to Egyptian rite, then counts royal treasuries with a banker's eye. Gold statuettes of Serapis melt into ingots. Temple lands are tallied and auctioned. Rome's grain dole rises, so the forum cheers the conqueror, whose harvest comes from a river they will never see. A scholar named Apollonius watches library shelves emptied onto ox carts. The conquerors claim they'll copy the best scrolls in Rome and return them. He doubts he'll ever read them again, so he memorizes passages at night, pacing terracotta rooftops while embers from distant braziers drift like dying words. He repeats Euclid, fragments of Sappho, a treatise on heartbeats by Herophilus, trying to graft pages onto silence before silence swallows everything. Egypt becomes a province with a prefect, not a senator, lest any Roman peer command such wealth alone. Greek remains language of trade, but Latin pours into legal tablets. Legionary camps stud the Nile's flanks like bronze nails. A veteran farmer from Gaul receives a plot near Hermopolis and writes home that the soil here births wheat tall as his helmet plumes. Village priests continue to pour milk at dawn for Bastet. A centurion shakes his head but drinks the milk anyway, saying a cat goddess who guards granaries is practical in any tongue. East of Thebes, quarry slaves cut red porphyry for bathhouses in Rome. Among them is a teenage stowaway from Crete who swapped his name for citizenship and found instead a chain. He chips stone until fingers bleed chrysanthemum patterns into callus. At night, he dreams of the Cretan sea rolling beneath gull screech, but dawn wakes him to desert silence, broken only by picks and the clatter of wooden wedges swelling in water. He hears Latin orders shouted over Egyptian curses, and wonders which language the rocks will remember when voices cease. In a valley west of Alexandria, Jewish farmers prune vines that will pour into amphorae for Passover tables across the Levant. Some years the prefect doubles export tax. Some years he halves it, chasing quotas sent from emperors who count satchels of silver the way priests once counted jars of lotus unguent. On Sabbaths, the farmers rest under fig shade and tell their children tales of Moses drawn from the Nile reeds, river folded into river, memory stitched tight over centuries of drifting frontiers. One winter, the prefect Gaius Cornelius Gallus engraves his own boast on a temple wall beside Nubian cataracts, naming himself Conqueror in letters as tall as a man's reach. Augustus frowns at such ambition. Gallus is exiled, and future governors learn to sign edicts small. Meanwhile, tax registers multiply. Columns of names, born in Mendes, died at Hermonthis, profession weaver, status free, pressed into wax tablets stacked like hive cells. A clerk named Tiberius Petasiris licks his stylus tip and wonders whether an afterlife ledger tracks governors the same way. Perhaps Osiris himself audits soul tallies by torchlight. As Rome's grip tightens, Alexandrian glassmakers innovate. They balm smoke chambers with manganese, coaxing transparency so clear perfume shimmers unbound. Amphorae vanish, blown glass flacons float across villas at Baiae, filled with Nile nard and sealed in beeswax. An old potter in Memphis finally smothered his last kiln fire, murmuring that clay gods cannot compete with sand spirits turned to crystal. Change quickens. Emperor Hadrian tours the valley, sails a gilded barge northward, writes melancholy poems about drowned cities, and names his favorite youth Antinous divine after the boy slips from deck into Nile currents swollen by winter rains. Statues of Antinous sprout like alabaster lilies in temples, a Greek youth clad as Osiris, while locals recite hymns older than any emperor's memory. In Oxyrhynchus, fashionable ladies stitch thin lead tablets with magic spells, asking Antinous to bend love toward them as the river bends toward the sea. Somewhere in a drafty sanctuary outside Hermopolis, a scribe transcribes a gospel into Coptic, letters looping like braided reeds. He pauses to sharpen his reed pen, glances at a lizard skittering across the stone floor, and wonders if future scholars will handle his ink like treasure or scrape it for fresh words. Under the same roof, monks weave baskets from palm fronds, trading them in markets where Latin tax stamps thud onto receipts, and Greek curses tangle with Aramaic proverbs over price. Setbacks mount for Rome. Grain fleets fail twice during solar storms. Alexandrian merchants hedge with contracts promising shipments, wind and gods permitting, yet riots still flare in the Subura when bread queues thin. A governor with trembling hands etches new levy codes. A centurion nails them to temple doors smeared with soot from funerary candles when plague sweeps the city. Villagers along the Fayum dig deeper wells as water tables fall. They invoke Serapis, then Isis, then Christos, layering prayer on prayer like reeds in a raft they hope will float across uncertainty. Caravans from Berenice bring pepper, silk, and Buddhist figurines carved in sandalwood. A philosopher at the Museon lifts one, tracing the hair knot, and muses that truth circles the world on sandal feet. His students laugh, but beneath their laughter coils unease. Imperial roads crack, soldiers' pay bags weigh less each year, and the desert tribes ride nearer to canal gates at dusk. The lighthouse lamp is lit with ever rarer olive oil shipments. Some nights its beam gutters, sputters back, leans on the dark like a tired eye. When Diocletian reforms the empire, Egypt becomes his cornice of gold, taxed in kind, counted grain by grain. Bureaucrats assign every man, woman, and mule a category. In the Thebaid, a farmer named Bekenmut receives a wooden tablet listing harvest quotas he could once meet with spare sheaves. Now he stares at figures too high, even in flood years. He scratches charcoal edits in the margin, hoping a weary clerk will accept them. But the clerk has his own tablet, and fear travels both ways along the chain. In the delta marshes, reeds whisper between crocodile bellows. New faith rides the river. Christians flee Roman persecutions, nesting in desert caves where silence teaches prayer sharper than any priest's homily. A girl named Sophia dips wool into indigo vats by day and copies psalms on pottery shards by candle stub at night. When soldiers raid, she buries her shards under acacia roots, trusting desert dryness to guard words for hearts unborn. Constantine's edict stops the persecutions. Basilicas rise beside abandoned temples, and Greek psalms echo where hymns to Horus once soared. But schisms cut deep. Arians argue substance, Orthodox counter substance with fire, and monks scour scriptures for salvations tiny as mustard seeds. On the riverbank at Nitria, anchorites trade silence for insight. One claims he has not spoken in 5 years, yet his gaze reads souls like unrolled papyrus. By now, Rome itself cracks. Vandals sweep Iberian plains, Huns hammer Gothic shields, and Constantinople, gleaming new capital, claims Egypt's grain with insistent decrees. Alexandrian dockworkers heft amphorae stamped with Chiro, but wages arrive clipped and late. A mathematician named Hypatia climbs library steps at dawn, orders wax tablets erased for fresh lectures on conic sections, and greets sunrise with equations that spin like wheels within wheels. When her cloak catches on a bronze scroll cradle, a student rushes to straighten the cloth. She smiles, unaware that political envy sharpens blades in city alleys. Her murder years later will tarnish streets with fear so thick, scholars whisper proofs behind locked doors. Across deserts to the east rise armies laced with verses of a new revelation. They meet Byzantine spears outside Pelusium. Sandstorms sag sails, swords ring beneath palm shade, and the fortress falls. Alexandria surrenders in 641 CE. Arab scribes inventory grain depots, rebuild canals clogged with Roman neglect, and negotiate taxes denominated in dinars weighty and bright. Greek retreats into monasteries, Coptic blossoms as village tongue. Arabic unfurls along market stalls like banners of possibility. A baker weighs loaves on a restored wooden balance and marks the day's sale with 3 scripts on 1 shard. The old, the older, and whatever comes next. Through every tongue the river glides the same. At dawn, fishermen cast nets glittering with silt. At dusk, women rinse barley in pots blackened by camel thorn fires. Stars tilt, dynasties crumble, scripts blossom and wither. But mud beneath fingernails returns each season to the same scented earth. And when a child presses a palm into wet riverbank clay, the print fills slowly with water. New tide into ancient shape, promise repeating promise while night herons call across fields that have never forgotten how to dream in floodlight.